Turn in your Bible, if you would, to the book of Ruth, chapter 2. Pick up in verse 13 this evening as we continue our study. In our last lesson, we were introduced to a man named Boaz, who was a relative of Naomi through her deceased husband, Elimelech. As Ruth goes out to glean in the barley fields around Bethlehem, she providentially ends up among the servants of Boaz as they harvest his land. Boaz shows up to see the progress that's going on, and he notices, there's a new face in the crowd, a person that he didn't recognize as one of his servants. And upon learning who she was, and how she had behaved up to this point, her hard work that she had done, and the wisdom that she had shown in coming and asking permission to glean among the sheaves and things like that, Boaz encourages Ruth to remain among his workers, and offers some provision for her. He also blesses her, calling on God to reward her kindness and faithfulness to her mother-in-law, Naomi. And so this evening we're going to continue with this interaction for just a few verses, and then we'll see how things unfold for Ruth a little bit after that as well. So Ruth chapter 2, beginning in verse 13 this evening. Here the Bible says, "Then she said, 'Let me find favor in thy sight, my Lord, for thou hast comforted me, and for that thou hast spoken friendly unto thine handmaiden, although I be not like unto one of thy handmaidens.'" So Ruth here responds to Boaz's blessing that we just saw in verse 12 with continued humility and gratitude for what he had done. When she says, "Let me find favor in thy sight, my Lord," it's less of a request and it is a recognition of his kindness, and I guess in a sense a request for that to continue on. She's confident in the grace that he's shown and the favor that he's shown her. And so this is kind of an expression that she trusted in him and trusted his word that he would continue to show her that kind of kindness and to help take care of her in this state of need that she was in. This wasn't her begging or presuming upon his grace. It wasn't taking advantage of a situation in any way. But it's simply an acknowledgement of the words that he had spoken as being true and sincere. And so she's basically just saying thank you. And I appreciate that. And I'm very grateful for the grace that you've shown and the help that you've given. She shows the importance of words, I think, by highlighting the comfort and the encouragement that she receives from Boaz by simply being friendly. I know that I'm one who's very much kind of let's just get to the facts and deal with things like they are, and I'm sometimes a little straightforward and gruff and not quite as sensitive to things because that's kind of just my nature and it's how I am. I just like to get it over with and be done with things. But it's a good reminder that while sticks and stones break our bones, and we say that words will never hurt us, the reality is that words can hurt, and words can have a big impact on us in a lot of different ways. And so I think for us personally, for dealing with other people who may be saying mean things to me, that saying's a good one. Don't let it affect you. Don't let it bother you. Don't let it get you down. Don't let it hurt you if you can avoid that. But I think in dealing with our interactions with other people and how we speak and how we treat other people, certainly we have to be cautious and careful and understanding that what we say does matter, and that words do carry a lot of weight at times, and they can have a lasting influence. For Boaz, he showed just a little kindness. He didn't do anything extraordinary out of the way. In some ways, he just kind of did what he should have done anyway, right? This was a law in the land of Israel that they could come and glean after the people had harvested, that they had the right really to do that. And so he wasn't really going above and beyond or going crazy with this. Now, we'll see as we go on that he certainly takes special interest, and he does show special favor to Ruth going forward. But up to this point, it was basically just, I'm going to permit you to do these things. And yes, he did speak kindly to her, and he spoke some things about, she could come in and get some water and things like that. But in general, that was kind of just being decent. And yet it had a huge impact on her because, as she says there at the end of that verse, she's a stranger, right? She wasn't like the other handmaids. She wasn't like his servants because she was a foreigner. She was from a different place. And if the timeline is what I suggested earlier, and this was like not long after Moab had been oppressing Israel, then you can imagine how the people of Israel would think about a Moabite woman coming in and even in a lowly state like this and gleaning among the fields. You can kind of imagine the look that she may have been getting, or the things that may have been said to her as she was there in Bethlehem. And so whether that's the case or not, just being there as a foreigner, as an outsider, and having somebody speak kindly to you, having someone take an interest in what's going on, and recognize that you're trying, that you're doing your best in the situation that you're in, it can go a long way. And so Boaz showed that grace, and he showed that interest and some compassion that was very much appreciated in the life of Ruth. Now, Boaz continues to show that kindness again, moving on in verse 14. It says, "And Boaz said unto her, At mealtime come thou hither, and eat of the bread, and dip thy morsel in the vinegar. And she sat beside the reapers, and he reached her, parched corn, and she did eat, and was sufficed, and left." So Boaz had already given some allowance for Ruth to come in and to take the water that was drawn by his servants to take care of those who were harvesting and bundling up the wheat and all those kind of things. Now he offers her a portion of the food that they were eating at this time. He invites her to come and to eat with them and to dine. And the parched corn that it's talking about is basically roasted barley. This was during the barley harvest, and so they would take some that they had freshly harvested, and they would cook it over the fire and prepare it in that way. They would sometimes eat it with bread. This was probably with bread, since they said to dip the bread in the vinegar, and that's just kind of what their meal would consist of. And so he invited her, he took care of her, he provided for her in this way, and again, just showing some grace and some interest. Says that she ate her fill. She had plenty to spare, which is what's meant by "and left." It doesn't mean that she ate and got up and walked off, because we see in the next verse that she continues working the rest of the evening. But she had some left over. And so she kind of bundled that up. She showed some wisdom in not just, forgetting the leftovers, but she was going to take that home, as we'll see in a couple of verses, for Naomi to eat. Because remember, at this point, they were pretty poverty-stricken. They didn't have much, and they were basically kind of day-to-day finding sustenance. Sometimes we complain about how hard we've got it, but I imagine everybody here probably has a refrigerator full of food at home, or maybe it is getting kind of late in the month. Maybe we don't have a whole lot, but come the first of the month, we'll have a whole lot once again, right? And all of us can go to Walmart and get what we need. They were in a spot where they were in desperate need of food, and so even this little morsel that she would take home would be a benefit to Naomi and would help them out in this situation that they were dealing with. And so Boaz once again shows this favor, shows grace toward Ruth in providing this little meal for her. In verses 15 and 16 we see Boaz continues that generous treatment. Verse 15, "And when she was risen up to glean, Boaz commanded his young men, saying, Let her glean even among the sheaves, and reproach her not. And let fall some of the handfuls of purpose for her, and leave them that she may glean them, and rebuke her not." So Boaz instructs his workers to allow Ruth to glean near the sheaves that were being bound. What would happen is they would come through and they would cut the wheat, and then they would have another group or team coming in behind those who cut the wheat, and they would bundle it up and gather it up and put it in the sheaves, and then it would be transported off later. And like we talked about a little bit last week, whenever they did that, they were allowed to go in and gather it all up once and tie it up. But whatever scraps were left laying around, that was what those who were poor, they could come in and glean there. That's what gleaning was. And so there were certain areas, the corners of the fields, they wouldn't harvest at all. But in general, they would go through, they would cut it, they would bundle it up, and whatever was left, that was kind of fair game. But for somebody who wasn't upright, for somebody who didn't do things the right way, they could sneak in among the sheaves, and while they were pretending to glean, right, pick up the leftovers, they could snatch some from the sheaves that had already been bundled up and take what wasn't theirs, what they shouldn't have been taking. Now, Boaz makes it clear that they were to allow Ruth to gather even among the sheaves, and what that shows is that he had trust, that he believed her, that he believed her faithfulness, he believed that she would do the right thing, and so it showed that, but it also gave her opportunity to get a better harvest, obviously, because there would be more wheat laying around or barley laying around that area, that she wouldn't have to wait till the sheaves were all loaded up and moved out of the way, and then everybody that was gleaning could come in. She was allowed that special privilege of coming in among the sheaves even, and not only that, you notice that he said, oh, and also just kind of throw some extra down there for her, right? Give her extra, give her more, leave more to glean than you would typically, on purpose. Don't do it by, do this on purpose. This is an intentional thing that he wanted to do. And again, it shows that he's showing favor. It shows that he's trying to take care of her and the need that she has, because he appreciates the testimony that she's shown. Right? He appreciates the faithfulness that she's shown to Naomi in taking care of her and coming back to Bethlehem in the first place, and now in doing this hard labor to make sure that they were fed and provided for. And so he continues to show this favor. Now, she was unaware of the details of this part of it, probably. Some commentators think that he said this loud enough so she could hear it, so she could know that she could go there, but it would seem that she had already asked that, right? She had already asked if she could pick up and glean among the sheaves already. And so she already had permission for that, but I don't think that she knew about the extras that were kind of being left, and how she would be able to get a lot more than typically would be the case. So they finish up their meal after eating. She continues gleaning the rest of the day, and then she heads home a little bit later. Verse 17 it says, "So she gleaned in the field until even, and beat out that she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley." So an ephah of barley is about 5 gallons. So imagine a 5-gallon bucket. And this was after she had beaten it out, gotten the husk off, and all that kind of stuff. And so it was a pretty good amount. Now, again, I always say this, but I've never really harvested any barley in my lifetime, or done much farming or anything like that. But 5 gallons worth of wheat, not just stalks and all that kind of stuff, but actual grain barley, sounds like a lot, and apparently it is a pretty good harvest for a single day. For a single individual. And again, it's not a surprise because she was shown favor, but it also speaks to her diligence, right? Even if you're being shown favor, you still have to pick it up off the ground, right? You still got to do the work to get it in the bucket to take care of yourself and your mother-in-law. And so she was willing to do that. It speaks to her character. It also shows how the servants did exactly what Boaz said and provided for her. And it's estimated that this would probably be enough to feed both Ruth and Naomi for about a week. So that's a good harvest for her for a single day, and this would continue on as she continued to come back and glean from day to day. In verse 18, Ruth returns home and tells her mother-in-law about the events that had taken place. Verse 18, and she took it up and went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. And she brought forth and gave to her that she had reserved. After that she was sufficed. And so it's uncertain again if Ruth realized how well she had done that day in bringing home that much barley on the first time and in just a single day's work. But Naomi certainly understood that it was significant and important. She also, as it says there, she gave some of that leftover that she had eaten, the roasted barley. She gave that to her, and so that meal was taken care of as well. Naomi does recognize the significance there. Verse 19, it says, "And her mother-in-law said unto her, Where hast thou gleaned today, and where wroughtest thou? Blessed be he that did take knowledge of thee." And she showed her mother-in-law with whom she had wrought, and said, "The man's name with whom I wrought today is Boaz." So, Naomi's looking at it and she's saying, wow, where did you find all this? Where did you get all this? And this wasn't like an accusation that she stole it or anything. It was just saying, hey, this is amazing. And she understood enough to say that, somebody showed you some favor, partly because of how much she brought home, and also because she brought home that roasted barley. Or Ruth wouldn't have had any opportunity to do that. She would have had barley, but she wouldn't have had a fire or anything like that out in someone else's field. And so Naomi kind of put 2 and 2 together and figured out from the story that she had heard up to this point that somebody had helped take care of her. And she blesses them for that, right? She says, "Blessed be they of the Lord." And so, she's grateful. She's thankful for this favor that had been shown for the benefit of Ruth, and ultimately it would turn out for the benefit of Naomi as well. And so she recognizes those things, and she does ask, where was it? And so Ruth tells her, I was in this field, and it so happens that the man's name was Boaz. Now, Naomi knew who Boaz was. She had an understanding of that, and realized the significance there. As we go on, verse 20, it says, "And Naomi said unto her daughter-in-law, Blessed be he of the Lord, who hath not left off kindness to the living and to the dead. And Naomi said unto her, The man is near of kin unto us, and one of our next kinsmen." And so, she recognizes who he is, and again, she's thankful for him, and seeks a blessing from God for him for two reasons, right? Number one, he took care of Ruth in the living, but also out of respect to the dead. Part of this may have been very specifically that he was taking care of her for that reason, because we already saw that Boaz knew who Ruth was. He knew her story and how she had come to be in Bethlehem. He knew about Naomi, and certainly he knew about the relationship that he had with her through her deceased husband. He knew that this is family. So not only was he just kind of showing kindness and generosity in a general sense, but specifically towards someone who was a relative, someone who was part of his family, even if not, directly related as, siblings or anything like that, but close enough to where it says there that he was near kin. In fact, he was one of the next kinsmen. That idea of the next kinsman is significant for several reasons. Primarily, it had to do with the redeeming of the person who had been deceased and what they could do. Under the law, the near kinsman had rights, including the ability to avenge the death in case of a murder. And so, if I had been murdered, then the caveman could go out and find whoever killed me and, take vengeance upon them. Or he could just stay home. It was up to him, really. But that was one of the rights of the next of, we call it next of kin. They called it near kinsman. Another one was that they could redeem property or possessions that had been mortgaged by the deceased person. They could go back and redeem those things. They didn't just take them away, but they would give the money and get whatever the possessions or property was back in return. Also, the property itself in the year of Jubilee, when it's complicated, we're not going to get into the whole Levitical laws and all that kind of stuff, but basically it would ultimately come back to the family, and if that deceased person didn't have an heir, then it would go to the nearest kinsman, and the line would be passed on. And then finally, and most significantly here, I suppose, would be that the nearest kinsman had the responsibility of marrying the widow and raising up a child for descendants for the deceased man. And so all those things were tied into this idea of the next kinsman or the nearest kinsman. And it is significant because really Naomi both and Ruth would fit into that category of finding someone who was the next kinsman to take care of them and for the benefit of Elimelech and his sons, raise up children under them. So again, it's an important thing, and certainly Naomi recognized the significance of it, recognized the fact that that Boaz was a near kinsman and could fulfill that role. Ruth finishes then by telling Naomi the instructions that she was given, verse 21. And Ruth, the Moabitess, said, "He said unto me also, Thou shalt keep fast by my young men until they have ended all my harvest." And so again, this just shows that she was hopeful of the situation, that would be able to continue, that she'd be able to bring in from the gleaning a good amount like she had been, and how Boaz had showed her favor and had promised to continue that favor toward her, not only personally but through his servants and those who would be working in the fields with her. Naomi is kind of the same mindset, verse 22. And Naomi said unto Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It is good, my daughter, that thou go out with his maidens, that they meet thee not in any other field." And so she says, yeah, you need to stick with them, you need to stay close. In fact, she gives kind of a stern warning about, don't go in another field. Don't be seen somewhere else, because, Boaz had shown such compassion, he had shown such concern. For her to go somewhere else would kind of be a slight to that, and could easily offend someone. Now, Boaz was a man of character, and so hopefully he wouldn't have been offended, but you never know, and certainly that culture, it would have been viewed as a slight. It would have been viewed as something that would bring offense. And so he tells her, or she tells Ruth, be careful, be careful where you're harvesting, be careful where you're gleaning, and make sure you stay close to his servants just like he instructed you. You follow his advice very closely, because it is a good situation for you, and ultimately it's the right thing to do. He had shown that grace, he had shown compassion and favor toward her, and so it was wise and good of her to show respect and to follow his request in that manner. The chapter concludes by showing Ruth's obedience to Boaz and Naomi. Verse 23, so she kept fast by the maidens of Boaz to glean until the end of the barley harvest and of wheat harvest, and dwelt with her mother-in-law. And so she continues in the company of those workers throughout the barley harvest, and following that through the wheat harvest. This would have been a period probably of 2 to 3 months that she was in the field doing this work. The barley harvest began at the time of Passover. The wheat harvest began around the time of Pentecost, which is 40 days or 50 days later. And so beginning then, it continued on for a certain period of time. And so for 2 or 3 months, she was doing this hard labor. And so again, it shows her faithfulness. It shows her willingness to stay there and do this hard work, and ultimately be willing enough to continue doing it when there's no real signs or indications that anything's going to change. She was going to be content with that life and taking care of her mother-in-law during this time period. Obviously, she continued to stay with her there in Bethlehem, traveling out to the fields to work and then returning there to rest at night. So she was industrious, she was a hard worker, and she also showed wisdom in the decisions that she made and in the way that she carried herself. And next week we'll move on to chapter 3, where Ruth and Boaz meet once again at the end of the wheat harvest, both harvest seasons as they wrap up and things are concluding, and we'll see how the story progresses from there. All right, any questions or comments?